Hello everybody and welcome to Wise Exotics. I'm your host Trevor, and today we'll be going over how to grow Nepenthes, episode 2. In the last video we covered a numerous amount of subjects and how or what type of conditions you need to keep in mind when trying to grow these plants. Now, the window setup is typical, but if you're unable to do a window setup, there are grow tents, little portable greenhouses. You can even do something like you get a rack like this and cover it with a plastic tarp. There are tank setups like you've seen my other little one that I use for some of the more sensitive little Nepenthes I'm growing that just take longer to grow. A lot of the ultras and highlands types tend to grow very slow. Some of these I've had for 3 to 4 years, and they're just starting to pick up size. Some of them are still this big, so keep that in mind when you're growing these plants. They're not all going to just pop up like that giant leafy plant in the corner. Now, something else to keep in mind is seasonal changes. A lot of Nepenthes change and or produce pitchers and or growth depending on the type of season it is. Some will do better in autumn, fall, October, November. Some will really push through in winter. Some will be really happy in spring and summer. It's a varied range, and that's all because of the different conditions and environmental habits these plants have. Remember, these plants are from all over the world at different locations, so knowing where they're from and what their weather seasonal changes are at that time will kind of give you a hint of why that plant is behaving at. Why is it growing at this time? Well, that's usually why. It's a different equator distance, it's a different seasons in comparison to our own. Now, you might be wondering, so how do you procreate these plants? Well, Nepenthes are either male or female. There is the rare, very rare case of heteromorphic Nepenthes that are self-reproducing in some cases. I've seen 3. One recent one, the gentleman's plant, was a female to start, and then half of it became male, and it started already producing seed pods. Now, Nepenthes seed pods typically are wind type. So if you ever seen like wheat or any of those type of wind-borne seeds, such as those pine cones with little wings that kind of spin down and land, those are very similar to Nepenthes. Usually they'll be a node center, and at each end of the node are spikes. Those spikes allow it to take wind and basically helicopter into the air. Now, these seeds are extremely light and very adapted to wind or the slightest amount of wind or air disturbance to make them move. So when I tried to grow some of these plants as seedlings last year, I had a nice little clean room set up. I had a box, I had gloves on, I had a mask, I had goggles, I did everything. I wore like a painter's suit, so none of that would get on me, or I could see them if they got on me. I sowed the seeds, I did all that, I took everything off, and I looked at my hand, and there was one on my finger here. I was like, how did you get in my glove? I didn't even open that until I had gloves on. So they can be very sneaky, so just be very careful and take your time and kind of hold your breath during the process. Or if you need to sneeze or breathe away, which that will happen at the time when you least want it, just turn into a different direction as best you can. Savvy? Now, we talked about plant indicators. What is a healthy indicator? What is a good indicator? What is a bad indicator? You might be wondering. Well, we'll start with an easy one, and I know a lot of people initially get freaked out when they get Nepenthes because of this. So, example, healthy green leaves. That's a good indicator. These two are accidental crosses made by a gentleman called Mike Fallon. This one was created by a bumblebee who did not want to follow Mike's plan for breeding the mother plant, apparently. As an example, you can see these nice brown spikes coming out, and you're like, are those the older leaves? Yes. Basically, how Nepenthes grow, they grow usually along rocks or cliff faces, bark, in moss, whatever the case. They try to anchor themselves to the surface. So as these pleated leaves get older, they'll tend to yellow and then darken brown and then harden into these anchor-like spikes. This is an evolutionary trait to help them anchor to the surface and keep stable as they grow and develop and get bigger and longer as time goes on. It's a nice little handy trait, you might think. Now, down here, we can show you some other examples of things to keep in mind. So, this is typically how the leaves will go. The growth tip will turn black and die, then the leaf will turn yellow, and as it yellows, it browns. Now, I've had some turn all yellow, kind of like an orchid, but their leaves don't fall off. They'll just turn and harden. Usually for trimming, I will trim off the brown ones if they're a bigger Nepenthes species. That's just my personal take on it. This is an example of too much water, or too much water on the leaves. So these create red blisters. As you can see on the newest leaf, there isn't any. It's quite happy and healthy. This was one of the plants that was inside my tank setup. Here's another thing of scorching. Too much light was initially burning this plant. Now on the new leaf, it's nice and healthy. This is grass. This is because I have birds, and I even created a splash zone area to try to prevent them, but the birds tends to throw their bird seed and into the pots. She has a better green thumb than me. She just throws them at my plants when they grow. I swear. Now, you might be wondering, some plants have red coloring in their leaves. Is that natural or something to worry about? Some species, like this one, is a hybrid with Globosa. Globosa has red leaves on some of their variants. So does Peltata. There's another variant over here called, there it is, Palawanensis. Palawanensis can typically have redder leaves. Hybrids can also get their leaves. So this is a Raja X Peltata. As you can see, it gets greener leaves as they grow. I have a larger specimen further over there. You can see it's even still got some of the red leaves there. But as they grow, I had red leaves and they grow to green. It's varied. Some will have pure green leaves. Some will have green with a red stripe. Down the center, the like. Now you might be wondering about this little trait. Can Nepenthes be variegated? The answer is yes. Most plants can have variegated types. An example, if I can move over there safely, is this one. This one has a white stripe dead center. That is not typical of most Nepenthes. Now these two over here have variegated speckling, so they have red. One of them is almost entirely red. That is not natural of that species, that is a variegation. Now some plants, whatever they're hybridized with, or even if they're a natural species, can have red stems. So keep that in mind. Some can be fuzzier, some can be just big rubbery petals, some can be very pleated, some can be spade-shaped. Some, as you can see over here, can even be spidery shaped. There's quite a variety. Now, we've covered a lot. Some things I'd like to show off are things you can use to water the plants. So this is a mister. You can pick this up on Amazon or whatnot. It creates microfine mist. So if you have a plant that is struggling with producing pitchers, you can just spray the growth tip at the point of the pitcher tip and hope that that helps. Or, just fog it. Now, keep in mind, if you have species that are very sensitive to differences of ore in humidity or too rapid, that could be a problem. There are also spray bottles. This is typically how I would fill this with fertilizer. I'd weigh it up in a cup to get the exact amount I need in this. Then I'd put fertilizer in small amounts, trying to get the 50 TDS I spoke of earlier. Some people also have big spray pump ones where they kind of like you pump it and you hold the nozzle and you mist. Some people do misting systems. My personal problem with the misting system when I had one in a greenhouse is it tended to overwater and I always had to adjust it. At least me manually doing it is easier. I found the tray system myself to be better instead of misting, because then the water is pushing through here and it evaporates, keeping them in a nice little humid bubble to a degree. And there's no real chance of overwatering. So typically for these little trays, I'll keep the water right below the tip of the white part of the square. So just a little bit below. So that way, if the roots are there and seeking them, the water evaporates into that and it doesn't keep it soaked, but humid and happy. Now, another method you can try is simply a watering can. Usually gooseneck, in my opinion, are easier because then you can fill each little zone a little easier. Does that mean it's the only way? No. If you have another method you want to try, drip irrigation, whatnot, go for it. Whatever works. Lighting is also a good key, as I stated. If you're going to do those closed setups that we talked about earlier, really keep in mind that you'll need to probably do a little more light to make it for the lack of sunlight, or filler lights. Not crazily strong, but if you have plants that are in an enclosed setup like this, if you're only shining on the top, the ones that aren't getting any light, the bottom might need a little light there just to suffice and help them stay saturated with light during the day. I don't know if this helps also, but my lights rotate. So typically in the morning, these spotlights will turn on first, then the light up here, then the light there, then there. And that's the exact order that they turn off in. usually with about a 5-minute difference with these spotlights. I don't know if that really helps, but it was something I came up with to try to simulate like the rising of the sun going over and then, darkening and whatnot. I was trying to simulate day night times because when researching light, plants are very specific and build their internal clock based on the chemical reactions of day night timing. So to try to mimic their environment more, that was one thing I did. It's not something everybody does. Most people, to my knowledge, just have all their lights come on at once. But because mine are all manual timers, I was doing this, there's like a few minutes between it. So that's just naturally what happened. And I went, hey, it works and I have no negative effects to it. They're all on during the day, all at the same time for the most part. So just that little initial start up, I think might help trick the plants thinking it's the sun rising. If it doesn't really help, I don't know. But that's just something I'm doing. Now, what are some companion plants? You might be wondering if you do want to only grow Nepenthes, or do you want something to grow with the Nepenthes that might be beneficial or helpful, or plants that can grow with Nepenthes in a similar setup? Again, this is dependent upon the species, but a lot of orchids usually go really well with Nepenthes. I know that jewel orchids in Highland are supposedly good together. You can also get Sendu, Sarracenia, Heliofloria, Venus flytraps. Most other carnivorous plants will grow with Nepenthes just fine. But it's again dependent on their variant zone. If you're putting the really, really cold ones together, technically there can be problems. I know I have a cephalotus hidden throughout all this that I have people ask on. It's actually in the tank setup over there, for those who are wondering about that plant. Cephalotus are a natural, how do you put it, convergent evolution to Nepenthes. They are a ground-crawling vining species of plant that is not related to Nepenthes in any way, genetically. And to my understanding, they also have little pitchers. Now, almost all cephalotus that I've seen look identical. They have big, squat pitchers with like ribbed teeth at the front, and then an M on the top of their little shelf up here, or leaf lid has a big M on it. It sounds really weird, but that's what they have. They come in different colors, usually greens, blacks. I've seen some with like a reddish hue, but usually purple, black, green are the typical. Some of them can be really tiny, some can be fairly big. They usually cluster and grow like a ground crawling vine. They're from Australia on a very small riverbank area, to my knowledge, that I can recall offhand. Anyway, that'll be the end of episode 2. I hope this video is helpful to those of you who are watching these. And if you have any questions, please post them in the comments, and I will try to either address them directly or use them to help answer everybody generically in episode 3. Trevor out. Thank you.